Good evening, everyone. Welcome. What a full, beautiful room. Tonight is pretty exciting, actually. My name is Marcia Eli, and we are, as you know, talking about the hidden landmarks of New York. And it's very appropriate that we're in a landmark building to have this conversation. This is the Center for Brooklyn History. We were built in 1881, or opened in 1881, and landmarked in 1965 as part of the movement that was happening then, that I think all of you are here to hear about and care so much about, to preserve the character of our past in this city. So before I get into what's going to happen on this stage and the rock stars that are going to be talking, I'm going to take a quick left turn because I have to say a word about what happens in this building right upstairs, given our topic. Right upstairs above us is the Othmer Library Reading Room. As I hope many of you know, the Center for Brooklyn History is a steward of the now most extensive collection of Brooklyn-related materials in the world. That happened when the Brooklyn Historical Society became part of the Brooklyn Public Library, and we merged the two collections. And the most popular topic that our librarians and archivists find people come to research is house and buildings. It's house and buildings. We have an incredible collection of land conveyance documents, fire insurance maps, which are stunning, city directories, many other collections. I'm just going to guess that a lot of people in this room may have either done research on a building or buildings or blocks, or have imagined doing research on buildings of all kinds. And I really encourage you to come back here and start here, because not only do we have an amazing collection, we also have some of the most helpful, I'm just going to say the most helpful staff of archivists and librarians to assist you in that research that you'll ever find. So Jordan's nodding his head, so he knows. So take advantage and scratch that curiosity itch about whatever building you have in your mind right upstairs. Okay, back to hidden landmarks of New York. Tommy Silk is like a fantasy biography. He had something that he did and wanted to do something that gave him joy, and started doing it, and that is documenting buildings and landmarks in New York City. And now he has 200,000 followers on Instagram. I mean, I think it's just a story of we should all follow our passion. He's posted every day for 5 years. I did the math. That's like 1,800 posts, more or less, right? But the good news is that with 38,000 landmarked buildings in New York, there's a lot of years to go before he gets them all. So this book, Hidden Landmarks of New York, is literally flying off the shelves. And I wanted to tell you that because a lot of people have already bought the book, and Tommy, of course, will sign the book in the front of the room after the program ends, after the conversation ends. I don't know how many we have left at our shop, but know that if you want to buy a book and aren't able to buy a book, we have these. These are book plates that Tommy will personalize for whoever you might want that book to be for. He'll sign these. You can get that book from your retailer of your choice, and voila, you have a signed copy of the book. So that's just a B plan if we sell out, which we will sell out. So I'm really happy to offer this program in partnership with Victorian Society of New York. Thank you, Eve Kahn, wherever you are. There she is, for that partnership and collaboration, and welcome especially to folks who are here because of your connection with Victorian Society of New York. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit, just a little bit about Tommy more formally, and Barry Bordelon more formally, who is his conversation leader, and turn it over to them. Tommy Silk has a degree in history from Fordham University and is a licensed New York sightseeing guy. He's lived in New York City since 2008, currently in Brooklyn. He can often be found riding his bike around the 5 boroughs with a camera around his shoulder, photographing, and he documents all that he observes on his Instagram account, which is at Landmarks of New York. Barry Bordelon is half of the beloved renovation duo, the Brownstone Boys. Shout out to Jordan Slocum, his other half and spouse, sitting here in the first row. The two of them lovingly renovate projects of all kinds. Barry is also a part-time real estate agent who bought and flipped his first studio apartment over 10 years ago. Barry and Jordan's first book is For the Love of Renovating. We had a wonderful conversation with them that Tommy led not so long ago. So this is a little deja vu for some of us. Anyway, please help me welcome a big round of applause for Tommy and Barry.
Wow. Thank you for being here, everyone. It's really great to be out and about in the world today and with our community and our friends and family, as I'm sure you guys all agree. And big congrats to you, Tommy, for this beautiful book. We were so excited to get a copy of it in our hands, and it is everything we hoped and more. Again, my name is Barry Bordelon, half of the Brownstone Boys, the other half, who's my other half, and my husband of 4 weeks, right here. Jordan is with us as well. And for those of you guys who don't know, we do historic restorations and renovations of Brooklyn brownstones and townhouses. So we're a huge fan of Tommy's and the work that he does and the light that he shines on all these beautiful buildings and structures all over New York City. So very excited to chat with you tonight and to learn a little bit more about your background and hear more about this beautiful book. So let's just jump right into that, if it's okay.
Yeah, one quick thing. How are we all doing? This is a weird week for me to be doing this, but like, how are we we're good, right? Yeah, ish, yeah. I think like 95% of us are probably not the best, but yeah. So hopefully we'll be able to talk a little bit about what makes Brooklyn and New York just such a special place and reasons for hope, and or just distract you. So either or, I'm fine with either. So just wanted to check in on all of you before we get started. So thank you all for being here.
Love that. So let's start at the beginning. Tell us a little bit about how you got into this. What started this passion for historic buildings in New York City, and what motivated you to translate that passion into Instagram and eventually this book?
How long do you all have? Get comfy. So the love of history thing, I distinctly remember the first time that it kind of clicked that was like my subject, 4th grade. And I was at an exchange program. It was a thing at a local museum in Connecticut where we were matched up with another elementary school. And they're like, what's your favorite subject? I'm like, oh no, science. And I'm like, wait a minute, no, like social studies. That was my favorite thing. Part of that's because I had a grandfather who was a history teacher in Rockland County for, 45 years or so. He was the official Rockland County historian. He was a Washington Heights native. And I was his first grandchild. We both shared the same name, eventually went to the same university. So as you might imagine, we were pretty close, and we would just chat constantly about history with each other. I was just, clearly I was cool in high school, but that was just like, that's what we had such a deep bond about it. I also grew up in Fairfield, Connecticut, about 50 miles north of here or so. And it was a colonial town, not too much younger than New York. It's from 1639, but unlike other towns in the Northeast, we didn't have so many of our colonial buildings because most of them burnt down during the Revolutionary War. So that always left me sort of with this weird itch, so to speak, of always wanting to try to find any kind of old building that I could, because there weren't that many, but I knew the stories were there. So fast forward, however many years, I got to Fordham University. I knew I wanted to be a history major. Didn't think about what happens when you graduate with that, especially in 2012. But I made the natural progression of going into financial software, as one does, and it got to a point where I still loved history. I love the stories. Like I love a true story. Fiction's great. I love fiction. Don't get me wrong. But when you can read something, you're like, a Hollywood scriptwriter would find that a little bit too over the top, but it's real. Like that's cool. I love that. And it got to a point where I was at a boring job, so I had some time to think, and I was like, you know what, I need a hobby. And I thought about, wouldn't it be cool if there was some way I could reconnect with my love of history? Fast forward a little bit further, I left the boring job and went to a downright toxic job where I was losing hair. I was so stressed out. And I'm very bad at compartmentalizing. So I realized in that moment that, okay, you know what? Like I had this idea of, one of these nights I'm walking home from this job, it just driving me crazy. And I would try to walk from Midtown East to the Upper East Side just to decompress. And one day I walk, I try a different route each night. And one night I walked past this building on the Upper East Side, and I saw there was a landmarks plaque there. So I finally was like, I'm gonna read this thing. And it was FDR and Eleanor Roosevelt's first house. And I'm like, how many times have I walked past this thing? And not once realized it was related to a president. So I'm like, okay, there's gotta be a database somewhere. If Bloomberg was mayor, it's been datafied. So turns out there is, and the Landmarks Preservation Commission has a map of every single one of the 38,000 buildings that are landmarked in New York City. And I just looked at the map. I borrowed my sister's Nikon DSLR, and I'm like, all right, I don't know how to take pictures, but we're gonna YouTube this and find out. And on St. Patrick's Day 2019, with my friend Chris, who's sitting up here, we just started meandering. And I just was like, you know what, I'm going to take a photo. I'm gonna try to post a photo every day, getting outside, taking a walk, good for my mental health. I wanted to also get back into the fact that I had used to write constantly, and I realized that emails kind of dumb down your, interesting ability when it comes to writing. So I just figured it would be a fun little exercise. So I literally started the page for me, and fast forward to today, and quite a few of you like it, which is pretty cool. So that's the long and short of how the actual Instagram came around.
And I mean, you come a long way from creating that first Instagram account, having that first post. Did you ever think it would come this far, and one day you'd be sitting in front of a couple hundred people and your first book is out in the world?
Absolutely not. My wife is always asking, like, how do this many people like old buildings? So I'm glad that we have a good community. So no, I mean, like I said, it's weird when you put this thing out into the world that is, I did it because it was the page I wanted to read. It's very validating to find out that other people also find it interesting to read, or at least presumably. I don't want to assume anything here, but it's no, short answer, absolutely not.
That's great. And a lot of people might not know this, but you have a full-time job. So you do this, what you do in your spare time. So how's that work?
Yeah, I was on a 6-hour conference call today, which, yeah, that's fun. It's a good job. I genuinely, I finally have found a job that does not suck, and I do very much enjoy it, which makes it really nice. Because, for the question, striking the balance has been interesting. Because, like I said, I started this basically as a mental health project. So even though it is definitely a ton of work to do this, it's the kind of work that is, it just helps me get through the day. So, I mean, do I spend probably every waking moment that's not work as part of this? A bit. Do I have a son now? Yes. Does that make it even more difficult? Absolutely. So I try to, because this was started as a way to sort of check in with myself, I just keep doing that, checking in, because the moment this stops being fun is the moment I stop doing it. The whole point of it is to, bring me joy, and I'm going to do it. Like, I haven't made this thing. Maybe I can make it full time. I don't know, but it's not stressful. it's nice. And like, this is amazing. Like I get to do this, and then tomorrow morning I have to hop on another call, but this is the escape, and this is what makes it so fun. So just making sure that I take the balance when I need to. If I need to walk away, I do step away. And yes, I have been posting every day, but at this point I've covered quite a few landmarks. And yeah, some of them might slip back in there when you're not looking. So I totally will recycle if I need to take a break or, just take a week off or something like that.
And I think that's what makes it so special, is that you're having fun with it. It's something that it brings you a lot of joy, and so it brings us joy as well. And that's what really makes, I think, your account so special and so fun to follow.
I think I've also just backed myself into a corner if I did want to go full time with it. But yeah, that's kind of what I was hoping for. Is it's everything you see on there is genuine, and I hope that for those of you who haven't met in person yet, if you read through the captions, hopefully you realize that this is just the way I talk, and the writing is the way I also talk. So hopefully it gives you more of a connection to the actual text itself.
So let's talk a little bit about what you are so passionate about, and what we're also very passionate about, because we're all here. And let's dive in, and let's start, I guess, at the top. What is your favorite landmark in New York?
Does anybody here know? Yeah, well, yeah, of course you know. What is it? Little Red Lighthouse. Yes, the Little Red Lighthouse under the George Washington Bridge on the Manhattan side. That is my, by far and away, absolute favorite. Did anybody have the kids' book, The Little Red Lighthouse and the Great Gray Bridge? Handful of you, yeah? Everything comes back to my grandfather at some point. When my grandfather grew up in Washington Heights, he and my great-grandfather would take walks every night down to the Little Red Lighthouse. So when I grew up, my grandfather was the first person who got me the copy of the Little Red Lighthouse. So I will always and forever connect the two together. I also didn't realize it was real when I was a kid. Because you can't see it from the highway. So like you're just kind of like craning your neck, like, where is it? Where is it? And then the first time I saw it in person, I'm like, wow, it really is little and red in a lighthouse. Like, that's amazing. It exists. So I adore that place.
And is there one that, and it could also be the same one, is there one that you developed a deeper appreciation for once you started researching it, that you really dove into and learned a lot about?
Yeah, I would still love the lighthouse. I'd actually transition to a house around here, actually. 70 Willow Street, if anybody's familiar with that. That is sometimes referred to as the Truman Capote house. I'm a little bummed because as I researched this building, I came back to it after we finished the book. And I found out that there was a whole story that I completely missed. And that story was, so the gentleman who built the house, guy by the name of Adrian Van Sinderen. He was an attorney with a really Dutch name, and he was very wealthy, and that's like the house is twice as wide as any other houses there. So that's how you kind of get a sense of how wealthy he was. He was a manumissionist. So he believed in a type of abolition of slavery, which involved the repatriation of freed enslaved people back to Africa. And he happened to hire a gentleman by the name of James Pennington before he built the house. And James Pennington was a formerly enslaved man who had escaped through Pennsylvania and basically challenged Van Sinderen to his face about manumission, and basically told him, like, you should be going for full abolition. Like, it was the easy way out for the 1830s to basically say, yeah, no, I believe in getting rid of slavery, but, we're not going to keep any enslaved people here. So Pennington not only convinces him to literally, he abandons the manumission society that he founded. Pennington becomes the first black graduate from the Yale Divinity School. And Pennington is going to be in a situation where he's not allowed to use the library. He has to sit in the back of the class. He was never given a degree. The Presbyterian Church did eventually look at his body of work and said, you have a degree from Yale in everything but diploma only. And he was ordained as a minister, and then ended up going on to be the officiant at Frederick Douglass's wedding. So that's one of these hidden stories that you just, like, even me who's looking into this stuff can still miss it. The house is nuts, though, because you have a situation like this where you have an abolitionist who goes like full-blown abolitionist. You have the first black graduate from Yale. It then goes to a family who is they're anti-suffragettes. Mrs. Putnam, who lived in this house, held rallies in the house against women's right to vote. Then it gets crazier, because then it's bought by a guy named Oliver Smith, who's a Broadway set designer, and he's the one who eventually has Truman Capote over there. So you also have somebody who's an icon of not just literature, but the LGBTQ movement living in this home that had also been home to anti-suffragettes, but had also been home to formerly enslaved people and abolitionists. Like, that's how many and now it's owned by the guy who does either founded or is the CEO of Rockstar Games. So that's where the Grand Theft Auto virtual money goes. So that's something like that. It's insane. It's just so layered. So that would be my very long answer to that short
That's
question.
great. It is. It's amazing how many stories there are in these old houses. That's one reason why we love them so much, because when we go into them and you kind of start peeling back those layers, it's physical layers, but it's also just layers of history and layers of time. It's so
1000%.
cool to hear. Okay, so what about Brooklyn? We're sitting in the Center for Brooklyn History right now. What's your favorite landmark in Brooklyn?
I'm going to cop out of this question slightly, for a good reason. So a building like the Center for Brooklyn History, Marcia, I love you. This isn't for brownie points. Buildings like this, buildings like Borough Hall. Basically, I think the buildings in Brooklyn that you can find that were dedicated basically to the independent city of Brooklyn, I find fascinating. If you in the book, there's the former headquarters of the Brooklyn Fire Department, and if you walk around Brooklyn, if you look at some of the old firehouses, you will see BFD instead of FDNY, and that's because up until 1898 we have Brooklyn as an independent city, and it's so fundamental in what makes Brooklyn what it is today that it was for a very long time. It developed completely independently from Manhattan. I mean, it was more of a rivalry jostling back and forth, but there was still an independent streak that it's crazy that even 125 years or so later it still exists. So anything I can find that shows me that, like, peels back that layer, and all of a sudden it's like, no, we got the city of Brooklyn. I think that's really fascinating.
I love that. That's amazing. And we were talking a little bit before this about some hopeful stories. We all need a little bit of reason to be hopeful right now. What's a hopeful story that you've found in your research?
So I think when it comes to history in general, it's very easy for us to look back and view things as sort of preordained. If you look back, I distinctly remember, when I was in school, thinking about the American Revolution, being like, well, yeah, naturally, like, that happened, and then the Constitution. It just seemed like everything, it makes sense that the things happened the order that they did, right? And you realize that when these events are actually happening, nobody back then has any more idea of what's going to happen than what we have any idea of what's going to happen next. So it strikes me about how many stories that I've been able to find of just this resilience of the human spirit. So, I mean, let's take the James Pennington example. Imagine going from enslavement to convincing probably one of the most powerful men in Brooklyn to abandon something that he started to do better. Or we can talk about Plymouth Church up in Brooklyn Heights. That was a stop on the Underground Railroad. There were people who risked life and limb to do what was right there. You used to have the same thing with the Bridge Street Church over where J Street Metro Tech is. You have situations in Manhattan like the Gay Activists Alliance Firehouse, not just Stonewall, but Julius Bar. There's situations where Julius Bar, as an example, that's going to be 3 years prior to the Stonewall Uprising. And it's literally New York City in the 1960s when it came to LGBTQ rights was downright draconian. If you were wearing 3 pieces of clothing and one piece was apparently not matching your assigned gender in the 60s, you could be arrested. Wow. And you were not allowed to be served if you were out at a bar. 3 men go into Julius's bar and they sit down at the bar, they tell the bartender, they order drinks, and then they tell the bartender that they're gay. And the bartender starts to pull the drinks back. And they sit there until, to make a big deal. But like, there are so many examples of individual people just standing up for what's right. And there are so many situations in which, the stories of these people aren't different than us. They just happen to live a different time period from us. So they didn't have any special, like, resilience gene that we don't have. It's something that, we're up next. We're at the plate. So it's a matter of, okay, what do we do now to fix things? And I think while history is a very good way to sort of look to the past to gain insights to the future, I think it's also very important to know that history is not the future, and the future is not written. So if you think that there's something that can be done, then there is something that can be done. And I think there's so many examples of very brave people in this book doing what's right, leaning on their community, and making sure that the long arc of history bends toward justice. It bends because you pull it. And I think that's a very important thing to think about.
Thank you for that. So this one I'm excited to hear from you. But what is a landmark that might be a surprise to someone? What's something that you think people may not know about? Maybe something that's very familiar and something they see all the time, but there's this secret, this hidden, fact that we may otherwise not know.
That's a lot. Thank you, Cooper, for trying to buy me some time here. All right, so let's talk about the Ghostbusters firehouse. I think that's a good example. So that is a real firehouse. I do appreciate that the fire department in that firehouse has fully embraced the Ghostbusters, and that's why it's on their patch. It might not be readily obvious that firehouse used to be twice as big as it actually is. So it is a single garage firehouse. It used to be 2 garages. The reason for that is also related to a very, very, very small landmark in the West Village that's called the Hess Triangle, if anybody's familiar with that. I call it the Spite Triangle. So the reason why these two things exist is because when the subways were starting to be constructed, we didn't have really good tunneling technology yet. So the easiest way to build a subway is you literally dig a ditch in the middle of the road, you put the subway in, you put a roof on the top, and boom, now you have a subway. Mm-hmm. The problem is that, at least for what's now the 123 train, 7th Avenue stopped at 14th Street. The commissioner's plan of 1811 that actually laid out the grid system took one look at the village and they're like, yeah, we'll start above it. And then they realized, okay, we need to build this subway. So rather than tunnel under those existing buildings, they literally condemned this entire swath, which is now 7th Avenue South, which then continues onto Varick Street through Soho, which is where the firehouse is. So, long story long, they destroyed all these buildings. The Spite Triangle, the Hess Triangle, was because there was a surveying error after the Hess family had their hotel condemned. But it's also the same exact reason, the same exact expansion that had to knock off half the Ghostbusters firehouse and shift it a little bit over on North Moore Street. So you're looking at a building, you're just like, yeah, it's a one garage firehouse that was in Ghostbusters. That's the story, right?
Wow.
No.
There you go. I love that. All right, there's so many beautiful stories for all these gorgeous buildings, these landmarks. Let's talk a little bit about the book. How do you decide which ones to feature?
Yeah. When I was talking with my editor, who is also here, who I greatly appreciate, at first we were like, could we limit New York down to 100 buildings? And I'm like, can you give me any more? So we went to 120. It wasn't easy. And initially, I first thought about constructing a book of literally just finding the oldest buildings chronologically and just putting them in there. And because there are a decent amount of buildings in the book that are from, the 17th century. There are still Dutch buildings remaining, none in Manhattan, unfortunately, but the oldest house, arguably in New York State, is in Brooklyn, the Wyckoff House. And we got to a certain point where the stories of the oldest buildings, especially once you get to like the 1800s, the stories are all basically the same, and the houses all basically look the same. So I'm not a marketing genius, but I could tell you that there's only so many 2.5-story buildings with little dormer windows that I can tell you about that some old white guy who had a carting business had in 1820. So I was like, okay, that's not going to work. So we kind of switched gears, and I thought to myself, I literally wrote down every single neighborhood I could think of in the 5 boroughs, then divided that number by 120, and then I was like, okay, I got this many to work with. We then discussed that as much as I love Queens, the Bronx, and have been to Staten Island, they have to have. We had to reprioritize some of those, unfortunately. So we had to put the main focus on Brooklyn and Manhattan. So we kind of did that, and I basically went neighborhood by neighborhood, and I tried to find a cross section of these neighborhoods. So yes, the oldest building. If I could find the oldest building, I was going to throw the oldest building in there. But then again, I wanted to have these interesting stories that reflect more than just just the age of a building. Because at the end of the day, like the reason why these are so interesting to me is that the buildings are the things that we can physically touch from history, but it's the people behind the buildings that make it interesting in the first place. So how do we bring that to life, and how do we bring the greater story of a neighborhood to life through the people behind those buildings? So there are definitely buildings that I thought were like visually beautiful that I was like, no, we're not going to put in there because like it just didn't fit that criteria. I tried to get as much as I could, and I wanted to dig a little bit deeper than surface level to try to find, again, some of these other stories that may have been missed to begin with. Because when you look at the landmarks that are in New York City, Landmarks Preservation Commission starts in the 1960s. We have the Brooklyn Heights Historic District's the first one in 1965 as a district. But when you look at why the Landmarks Preservation Commission exists, one of the main reasons is to sustain property values. Protection of landmarks and the history is also part of it, but property values is part of it because of the 1960s. So that leads you to the fact that you have a bunch of old white guys looking for areas to protect that have some value left in them, which means that overwhelmingly the older landmarks in the five boroughs, again, have that sort of similar story. So I'm like, okay, how can I try to find all of New York's story in it? Which I can't, but I did my best. I tried.
Did a great job.
But that was how we kind of went about finding the right buildings to have in here.
And for those of us who've known you for a while and see your Instagram posts, it's been 5 years and you've posted every single day. So we're very used to seeing those posts and hearing those stories from you. Is there a different way that you approached each entry for the book than you do for Instagram?
Yes and no. I was given a little bit more wiggle room in terms of space. But at the same time, my goal, if there is one of this, is to try to make this history just a little bit more accessible. When people tell me that they're not interested in history, I'm like, you just haven't found the right thing yet, because history is fundamentally the story of us. So it doesn't matter if it's, I think in, AP US history, you're talking about like, oh, how did the Panic of 1814 lead to blah, blah. I'm like boring you all right now. Like that's not worth it. But like, if you like science is history. If you like art is history. If you like poetry is history. Music is history. The human experience is history. So I basically wanted to try to connect people as quickly as possible to these things and make it as digestible as possible, so that it would probably encourage you to try to learn more, at least explore different areas that you might not have thought of before.
And the book is beautiful. It's designed very gorgeous. We're talking to your team before.
My art director is here. She did an absolutely incredible job on this.
I love the texture on it. It's gorgeous. I love how it's broken up into the boroughs. And Jordan and I wrote a book over the last couple of years as well, and it definitely has its ups and downs and its challenges for sure. So what was the biggest challenge with putting the book together?
So there were two different types of challenges with the book. So from a personal perspective, there was a massive challenge. So I got my lovely editor, Lisa, who's here, reached out to me in, I think it was January of 2023. So my mother-in-law was just about to be moved into hospice care after a very, very, very short battle with cancer. I'm very grateful that she was able to find out that we did, in fact, get a book deal. And unfortunately, we ended up losing her in February. And about 2 weeks later, my daughter was stillborn the day after her funeral. And that's why I'm not mad about him crying. We're going to get to him in a second. So old buildings was the last thing that was on my mind at that point in time. And it also, the time frame for it was basically from February, okay, we should have this by July. So I had to take a few weeks and just kind of figure things out. And while this was definitely difficult, it was also something that got me through the literal darkest time in my life. I can confidently say there will not be another worse time in my life than I had right there. And it saved me. I think it saved us. It was a purpose in what felt like a very, very, very purposeless time. And I think the other thing that showed me too is that I decided to post on social media about it, which I wasn't sure about doing because, at a certain point, sometimes it's a little bit strange, like how much you share about yourself. But the response that I got specifically from this community was absolutely overwhelming. And that helped me just keep pushing through. And I just want to say thank you to all of you who helped me get through this because literally, I don't know if I would have without this. And then, fast forward a few months and then the reality of like, okay, still got to write a book. Let's do it.
Right.
So apart from figuring out what buildings to actually put in there, because this has been a hobby, I haven't exactly been compiling a massive bibliography. So a lot of this was me going back and re-fact checking myself. And then I asked my publisher to fact check my fact checks. And I then came up with, I think it was like a 25-page works cited page. So if anybody remembers that from college, being the worst part of writing an essay, now imagine that just for a whole book. And that was what I was basically spending most of my time doing. And then there was also the new buildings that I had not done on Instagram at that point, which I put in there. But that was definitely a little tedious. But again, it was the difficulty also made it easier in a way, if that makes sense to absolutely anyone. But it did. So it just helped me get through a really, really rough period of my life.
That's great. I love that. And anything in the book that you're especially proud of how it turned out?
I mean, the whole thing. God, I just think, I think it does them justice, which I appreciate. And I do appreciate the fact that it's portable, kind of. So the amount of people have told me that they plan on taking it with them to go see things like that's the most rewarding thing you could possibly tell me, like that you would trust me with, you're basically bringing me along with you to talk in your ear the whole time, which I absolutely adore.
So we know you as Landmarks of New York on Instagram. It's your account name. But the title of the book is Hidden Landmarks of New York. So tell us a little bit about that.
So that was also part of putting the book together is we kind of came to the conclusion that we're going to go with lesser known buildings. And so basically no skyscrapers, spoilers. You're not going to see that in here. There are plenty of other books that have done that much better than I can do it. But it's the New York that I know and love. And it's that kind of, I wanted it to be that sort of joy that I experienced that night that I went past FDR's house of like, oh, that's what that is. And I hope that people feel like, the person I wrote this for is partly me, but it's partly I wanted it to feel like you had a friend walking around with you talking about New York. I literally, in the acknowledgments, I have two friends that I went to high school and college with, and we would just, again, really cool high schoolers, but we would just talk about history all the time. And I wanted to replicate just a bunch of people, just sitting around sort of BSing a little bit, but again, just make it approachable and make it enjoyable.
I think you're kind of touching on this a little bit now, but what's the goal of the book and who's it for?
For anybody who loves New York, but I also do walking tours, which, by the way, there are actually some available right now, which isn't usually that common. So if you're looking to get one, you should probably get it now. But when I do these walking tours of New York, I'd say 95% of the people who come on them live in the 5 boroughs, maybe 97 if you include Hoboken. So it was written for people who live here, because the whole point is I truly love local history. New York, even though it's this massive city, this is still local history. This is still our history. And when I hear somebody say, hey, I'm coming on a tour because I've lived in the Village for 4 years and I want to just be able to know more about my surroundings, like that makes my day. And that's what I want, is for everybody to just like, why should New York be just for the tourists? We're the ones who pay taxes. Like, we should enjoy it too. So I hope that everybody here can at least, walk past an old building in their neighborhood and then give it a second glance that you may have, in our busy lives, just go past constantly, God knows how many times.
And so the really amazing turnout here tonight, standing room only. There's people standing all the way back here, which is really cool to see. You always talk about how you have such a special community, which is also great. So what do you think about this history and all these beautiful landmarks? What do you think it is that is so enticing to people?
I think, to my point earlier, that it's tangible, right? Like it's here, and that's one of the few things that we have that you can, like, if you get a chance, please come back and go to the Othmer Library upstairs. If the fact that they haven't used it for the Gilded Age yet is a crime.
It's beautiful.
But it's when you put yourself in that situation, we can never obviously put ourselves in the places of people in the past, but you can start to get an idea. And I think that's just absolutely fascinating. I'm just trying for a quick moment to imagine what it must have been like when this was new. When, who were the people who were upstairs in that library? Like, what were they doing? Because at a certain point, that's going to be us. 70, 80 years from now, somebody hopefully will find this on a discount rack somewhere and be like, wow, I can't believe how much the city's changed. Like, that's crazy. Oh, wait, that building was red. Now it's not. It's already dated. The Edward Moody house in Chinatown, they restored it, so it's not red anymore. So it's already archival. But it just, I'm just so fascinated as to where we've been and to see where we might be going, that I just love marinating my head in it effectively. And I think that a lot of other people too appreciate the fact that when you walk into Brooklyn Heights or you walk through the Village, you can kind of get that sense of place. You might not get the sense of time, but you can get the sense of place. Mm-hmm. And I think that's fascinating.
Amazing. Very proud of you. Very happy for you. It's really cool to see how it's really taken off. What's been your favorite part of all of this so far? Any pinch me moments?
I mean, this is one of them. No, I mean, the turnout for these events has been unreal. Barry and I were talking beforehand about how, social media is an interesting place, right? And you can look at like a number of people who like a post. You can look at like a follower number, but it's literally just a number. You have no way of conceptualizing that. But when you realize that there are actual people behind it who care about what you're working on and that, are so engaged, which I think is the amazing thing too, is just how many amazing conversations, how much I learn from the audience is part of my favorite part. If I remember making a video about my favorite books about New York, and when I'm on my tour guide, when I'm doing my tour groups and people ask me, what do you recommend? I'm like, go to this video and don't listen to a word I say. Go straight to the comments, because that's where you're going to find the good stuff. So it's such an amazing, engaging community. And again, like I said, you guys helped me out when I was at my lowest point. And I've had people reach out to me saying that, this has helped them out, which I still can't believe, but I appreciate just so much. And if we want to go back to, things to give us hope, like, community should give you hope, because community does an amazing thing. And I've seen firsthand what a community coming together can do. And oh my God, is that powerful.
I love that. So what's next?
Well, my editor and some of my the staff that worked on the books here. So tell them that you want another one, because I would love to do that. I'm just gonna keep plugging along. Like, like I said, it's still fun. And so long as it's fun, I'm going to keep doing it. So I hope you guys have fun with it as well.
I love it. Well, thank you for putting this beautiful book into the world. I can't wait to walk around New York City with it in my hand and go to every site in it. So I think we're going to open up to Q&A and get some questions from the audience. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. I think we have do we have mics being passed around? Yeah.
Is it on? Okay. Thank you so much. This was really exciting. And if you spoke to this already, I apologize for not capturing it. But can you tell us a little bit about like the research process, or like, say there's this house, how do you find out about all the different stories, or how do you find something that strikes something in you that you're like, I need to know the story of this?
That's a really good question. So I mentioned before that there is this map by the Landmarks Preservation Commission that shows you where all the buildings are. What makes it even better is that if you click on a building, it gives you a link to the designation report when it became a landmark. So it's going to tell you that the Landmarks Preservation Commission is going to say, like, this is why this building's landmarked, either the building itself or the neighborhood that it's in. Normally, that works well when we're talking about like a standalone building. So there are like your individual landmarks, the Empire State Building, the New York Public Library, things like that. But when we're talking about a district like Brooklyn Heights or the Village, you kind of have to sort through this massive, 1,000-page PDF that they put out with information about the buildings. And the worst thing is when I do that, sometimes the building is just not interesting. And that's tough. So when that happens, I will expand the search out. There's a bunch of books that I use. Or I'll go through like newspaper archives and search the address, try to find out anything interesting. Found out that, there's been funerals in the building the brownstone that I live in. So my upstairs neighbor found that very disturbing when I told the audience that at Grace Church, but that's what the parlor was for. And yeah, so I'll go through there. Sometimes I'll go to the city, certain city websites, the Department of Buildings to find certain dates if I can't find it. But I always say if I can find a good story, great. If I get a good photo, awesome. Preferably both, but at least one. And if it's not an interesting story, sometimes I just don't. I'll leave a building off because I'm like, you know what, we got better things to deal with than this is the only building that has a bird carved above the second story window. The end. Or they're just ones that are in historic districts that just say they were built in 1883. I'm like, cool. Anything else? No? Okay, great. I love that. Love it so much. So hope that answers that kind of.
Hi, thank you so much for this talk, and I'm really excited about the book. I was wondering if there are any examples of the landmarks that are like unexpected ways that they've been repurposed today.
Oh, that's a good one. So just in case everybody didn't hear that, it's are there any landmarks that have been repurposed in sort of unexpected ways? Yeah. So one that comes to mind is 129 Spring Street in Soho. So this is a former federal 2.5-story townhouse. It's now a clothing store, which on its own that happens, right? Well, in the basement of it, there's a well. Literally next to the men's section, there's just a brick well. And there have been claims that well was the site of a murder of a woman by the name of Elma Sands, which involved the first murder trial under the Constitution, where Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr were the defense attorneys because they owed the brother of the accused money for being their architect. Little bit loose there, but I think that's just the first thing that comes to mind is you literally walk into this store and there's a sale rack and a well. And you're just like, what the hell why is this here? And I guess when they dug into the basement, it used to be a restaurant. And when they dug into the basement, they found this thing. And apparently every single waiter, when they went down, because they used it as their wine cellar, thought the place was absolutely haunted and that, stuff was falling off randomly. So they never wanted to go down there. So I very much want to ask the employees who work there what their thoughts are, or if they just don't even consider the fact that there's a random brick well in their store. So that's one of them.
I have a question. Hey, how's it
No, there
going?
you are.
Hey, are there, specific to New York, are there any neighborhoods or building styles that we consider beautiful today that at its time was considered ugly? And sort of with that perspective, how does that make you feel about, modern buildings today, like skyscrapers or whatnot, that maybe we consider to be not so interesting or, whatnot?
That's a really, really good question. So brownstones were like the McMansions of the turn of the 20th century. So there were people who were viscerally complaining about Park Slope being ugly. Just let that one sink in. And it's interesting because I wonder, I think about that a lot of what will we think about 50 years from now? I actually had people a few years ago, I put out a poll and I was like, tell me what you think a future landmark is going to be. And it was really interesting to see the spread of building types that people had. Is it 70 Spruce Street, the Frank Gehry building, the shiny silver one, that one could be interesting. I often try to check myself about Billionaires Row. I'm like, will I ever look at 432 Park Avenue and be like, yeah, that makes sense. Right now, no. But I think it's interesting too because the Landmarks Preservation Commission is also looking into this as well as like the New York Landmarks Conservancy, which is a nonprofit. They have been like fielding surveys basically of like, oh, what do you think about these newer buildings, newer landmarks that have potential? So like the IMP building on I think it's like 51st Street in Midtown, and I don't have the answer, but I'm just so fascinated to find out what it's going to be because I mean, it's such a funny mindset shift that you have to have.
Hi. I was wondering if you've done a lot of exploration of landmarks outside of New York and if you have any fun stories from that.
Yes, I have looked into outside New York City. I've included stuff from the rest of New York State, a little bit, but not too much. And then, yeah, I mean, I briefly have been working on a Landmarks on Film account. It's not very active, so don't rush to go follow it. But that gave me the opportunity that I could start looking at things. So I looked at some places in like back where I lived and grew up in Connecticut. I've thought about possibly looking at more because like I love New York, but there's so many good stories out there. I just don't know if I have time right now. But maybe, never say never.
Hi. I was wondering how you keep track of the sites that you either visit or post about. Like, is it a map with a bajillion push pins or like star ratings, anything along that?
Okay, so between us, I've been flying by the seat of my pants for 5.5 years. I have a notes app. If I ever am going through and like seeing if I've done a building, I just search for the address. And if I've repeated it, I put a number next to it. And it's literally just on my iPhone. It's nothing sophisticated. I wish it was. I wish I could tell you what I'm going to post tomorrow. I don't know yet. So when I say I do this for fun, this is very truly a bootstrap operation. Sorry, it's not more exciting than that.
Hi there, I'm in the back. I have a logistical question about how you manage your time.
Yep.
As someone who also has a full-time job and many hobbies I'm passionate about, how on earth do you manage your time in terms of planning the content just on like a weekly basis? Are you actually posting every day or do you make your full plan on Sundays and go from there? Just curious about that.
Again, you guys think I'm much more organized than I am. I think the most I've ever planned it out is like 2 days in advance. When I started doing this, the other reason why these are like little bite-sized chunks is because I figured that could be sustainable. As you probably heard, there he is. I am lucky enough that I do have a 4-month-old son, Cooper, over there. So there have been definitely times where I'm like, I got to just step aside from this, and I'll look at a building that I haven't posted in a year or two, and then I'll just put that back up. But I think it's just, again, this is what I love. So this is what I'm going to spend my free time on when I have it. And then I'm lucky that I got enough done before he showed up that I have this huge sort of collection where I can, I don't have to be out there every day taking photos. I can rely on this sort of backlog that I have. That being said, I'm going back out on paternity leave in a few weeks, and I very much am looking forward to busting out the stroller with the camera and wheeling around and doing that. So I don't think that helps you in any way, shape, or form. So I'm sorry, but it's just whatever time I have, I use.
In the back. First, I love a good crossover, so thank you both.
Yep.
You've posted a few times about old buildings that have not been landmarks, that have been bought by developers in New York or other people, other individuals, groups, that get threatened to be torn down for whatever logistical reasons. What can the public do, in your opinion, to kind of not fight that purchase, be able to fight to get those buildings landmarked and preserved?
That is a very good question that I don't have a great answer for yet, because I am 0 for 3 on that situation. I think there's definitely a balance to be struck when it comes to preservation. as much as I would love to save every old building, I am realistic about the fact that this is a dynamic city that needs to expand. I wish more could be done to try to reuse these buildings before we go the route of destruction. And I don't have a good answer, unfortunately, because, I showed up to the protest of 12 Gay Street in the Village. That was landmarked, and that was torn down because of neglect. Well, not neglected. 75% of the load-bearing wall mysteriously disappeared one night when a developer bought it. Oops. Now it's structurally unsound, and it has to be torn down. So I wish that when it comes to landmarks, we focus on the important things, which is protecting what we have. I do feel like there are times where I speak to people who own landmarked buildings where, like, changing the doorknob might be an absolute massive pain in the butt. But you can remove 75% of the load-bearing wall in the basement of a building and not face any consequences when the building comes down. Like, what are we doing? Like, so I don't know who you can lobby or push to, like, sort of reform a little bit how landmarks works, but I wish, anybody know who we should write for this? Like your assemblyman or something like that, your city council member. But I think there needs to be sort of a reckoning as to, okay, well, what are we trying to save here? Why are we trying to save it? And what can we do to do that in a smart way, an equitable way, and with a mind to history as well. But that's not my job, so I can kind of just say these things and not have any consequences for it. Oops.
Hi. You mentioned earlier that one of the oldest landmark buildings was from the 17th century. Do you know what the newest one is?
Ooh, when the most recently landmarked, or the newest physical building that's been landmarked?
Both.
Both. Okay. I think the most recent landmarks designation was either a block in either Brooklyn or the Bronx. I think the Willoughby Street in Bed-Stuy, it might be one of the newest ones in terms of, like, just the buildings are not new. And that's interesting. It gets to the point that the other person asked the question about of, like, I've been starting to look for newer buildings that are landmarked. An interesting one, which is like this is kind of a get out of jail free answer to that, is the Hearst building in Midtown. If you're familiar with the Hearst office tower. Yeah. Okay. So the base of the building was landmarked. The tower is not landmarked. The tower was built on top of the landmark. So it's an interesting mix of old and new where you're preserving. It goes back to your point about sort of adaptive reuse in a way. There are some townhouses on the Upper East Side that I know were heavily modified in the 1960s that look a little bit funky, but apparently some famous architect did it, so cool. They're landmarked. Or like the Japan Society, which is on, I think, 44th Street by the UN. That's one. I'll just keep rambling until I can find something. So, but know that I'm trying to look more at what are sort of the newer buildings, because again, I'm just very curious where that trend's going to go. What's going to be interesting 50 years from now?
This sort of follows up on that. Some historic preservationists are working to preserve buildings that other people don't like mid-century modern buildings or even brutalist buildings. And I wondered what your feeling was on preserving things that these are not, these are not our brownstone style or those kind of things.
As much as I don't love brutalist buildings, I know for a fact that basically the same thing would happen with some of these older buildings had we had that same attitude. So there definitely is merit to it. I would defer to, an architect or an architectural historian who knows more than I do about why one of these should be preserved, but I definitely think that that's worth saving because, again, that could be something that in the future we'd look back more fondly upon. I don't know how I would ever look fondly upon about like Boston City Hall, but somebody might. So, I think I do think that is something that needs to be continued to be looked at. Time for one more?
We have time for two more questions. There's one here and one in the back there.
I had just curious, are there any unlikely survival stories, things that like maybe shouldn't or couldn't, like almost didn't make it, and we still have today?
A lot. I mean, Grand Central's an example. That's one of the reasons why landmarks preservation exists is, so obviously we lost Penn Station, which is one of the reasons why this came into existence. But the preservation of Grand Central to stop building either an office tower on top of it or in replacement of it was what made the landmarks law that New York City made get to the Supreme Court to validate that, yes, indeed, the city does have the right to landmark private buildings for the public good. So that one, I mean, I feel like almost every single landmark building that I read about is this thing almost got torn down and then it didn't. And that's why they're still here. I mean, some of the really, like the nicest buildings you'll look at in the book, you'll probably see, oh, and they thought about tearing it down in the 1960s, or like France's Tavern in that neighborhood almost got torn down. So, and that was literally, you know, we're really scraping the bottom of the barrel when it comes to like Revolutionary War history. So we could have lost, you know, 1 out of 3 buildings left in Manhattan that has a relation to that. So yes, the answer is there are a lot that are close calls.
Thank you. Are there any neighborhoods in the boroughs that you're more interested in exploring as we go forward?
Yeah, I think so. When in the introduction, they mentioned how I usually ride my bike around to get to places. So with the full-time job, there's kind of like, there's a radius of what I can realistically get to. This past February, I had the opportunity to go out to Adderley Park in Queens, which has a phenomenal music and Black history to it, which was just, it was much further afield than I've been before. The housing stock was totally different from what I'm used to. It's not brownstone, it's literally standalone homes. And the stories were absolutely fascinating. So I'd like to continue trying to hit sort of the peripheries of the boroughs as, you know, time allows. And I do want to do more in like Queens and the Bronx. A lot of these, because the landmarking process is newer in these areas, they're a lot more spread out, which makes it just logistically difficult to get to. So I'm just trying to keep knocking them off as I keep going. Even Staten Island, there's a whole lot of good stuff on Staten Island. Then there's also a whole lot of buildings that sort of forgot what columns are supposed to be used for, but that's neither here nor there. So yeah, just continuing to hit the outer boroughs, because I feel like, you know, I've done, you know, when I go back to Manhattan, I'm like, okay, yeah, I've done that one. Like, again, I have 38,000 to choose from, but still, when the stories are sort of the same, you want to try to diversify as much as possible. So stay tuned, hopefully, for more of that.